Barb Pedersen. I am thrilled to finally have you on the show.
Thank you. I am also thrilled to be here and to be part of Never Done Before community.
Yes, I've been tiptoeing around your content for such a long time. And you've been in the facilitation world forever, I almost say. And let's start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Officially, I started when I started my business 28 years ago. And it's so funny to hear you comment that I've been around forever, because in a way I feel that way, yet I also feel that everything is new continually. So I would say officially, I started to call myself a facilitator in 1994 when I started my business. Looking back, I know it was a deliberate choice because I had worked for 16 years in government recreation and parks and community development, went out on my own and was doing the exploration of what am I going to be, and realized that what I did was facilitation. I also, though, wondered about the use of the term consultant, because I was also able to consult on strategic planning. And at that time, there was in the recreation parks and community world, a phenomenon called master planning. So I started with helping organizations master plan, and that's being more of a consultant, which is you bring in your expertise, and it comes down to, do I make recommendations or not? I realized very quickly that my love, my joy, my passion, my abilities was as a facilitator to pull out the wisdom of the group and let them make their decisions. So that's when I started saying, okay, I am a facilitator. And then really quickly to summarize this, looking back over my career before, I realized I'd been doing facilitation work, yet didn't call myself a facilitator. So 28 years, with the first year being, am I a consultant? And no, I'm a facilitator.
And I love the distinction of, am I giving advice or not? So a consultant giving advice, a facilitator not giving it. And I wonder to what extent this is related to the concept of neutrality.
The whole concept of neutrality and a facilitator being objective is something that was very core to me. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, I've started to rethink that. So let's start with the first part, the consultant giving advice, the facilitator being neutral and objective. And yes, I firmly believe that, facilitation is this great quote that I read. So facilitation is the art of drawing out what people intrinsically know and letting them own it. It's the art of observing, reflecting, guiding, and giving back. And it's by a woman named Ruth Hild, which I have tried to find out who she is and haven't yet. And I love that, the art of drawing out what people intrinsically know. So I still believe a facilitator is, as much as possible, objective and neutral as the group works through what it is. A consultant does make recommendations. A consultant, to me, brings in their expertise, brings in their content knowledge, shares that with the group, and the group takes that in and works that in. So for example, I facilitate a lot in strategic planning, and I will offer a strategic planning process, and then as a facilitator, help them work through it. I don't tell them whether they should have this strategy or this goal in their plan. That's their content. So still a firm believer in that. And a distinction I often make is a facilitator, a facilitative trainer, a facilitative leader, a facilitator consultant, where your first role may be as that trainer, and you're doing it in a way that is very facilitative. So drawing on the wisdom, letting the group bring their own. And that's coming out of Roger Schwartz, the skilled facilitator, who's one of my, probably he doesn't know it, but he's what I consider him a mentor. And so what has changed, because I want to touch on that quickly. The neutrality to me has changed because of diversity, equity, inclusion, racism, etc. And I have been following, particularly with the Black Lives Matter, and then here in Canada, very much Indigenous truth and reconciliation work. I've really been following colleagues and highly regarded facilitators talking about, we come out of our neutral stance when there is racist and stereotypical comments being made, and we acknowledge that with the group and how we feel about it, and encourage the conversation around that. So that's no longer being neutral about that aspect.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm still really working through, Miriam, as to how to work that into my core beliefs about the group has the content, the knowledge.
Interesting perspective on the concept of neutrality, that the facilitator may, and sometimes even has the responsibility to take a stance. And what just came to my mind is also the recommendations that a facilitator makes as opposed to a consultant. From what I hear, it's the facilitator recommends a certain process that will eventually help the group to come to their own conclusions and strategy. And still somehow I have the impression that a good facilitator is also good in synthesizing what the group has said. And then it's maybe not a recommendation based on their own reflections and their own wisdom as a facilitator, but synthesizing, extracting the wisdom of the group to give recommendations based on what they have found through the process.
I think it goes back to that definition about facilitation being the art of drawing out the group's intrinsic wisdom and then reflecting it back, presenting it back, and letting them own it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I touched a little bit because a lot of the core competencies of facilitation, and I really like the ones put out by the International Association of Facilitators, and I try to honor our global professional association. There's often not, I think, a recognition of how important that synthesis is. And beyond paraphrasing, I mean, which is a great skill, but at times a group wants the facilitator to synthesize, give it back to the group. This is what I heard. What do you think about that? And I work with a group, often in the pre-session, workshop, event, whatever we want to call it, meeting, to clarify how much of that they want me to do. It's not expertise in consulting about the topic. It is bringing in an ability to listen, hear, and then pull the nuggets out and say, this is what I'm hearing, are these what you are thinking? And to go with that quickly is the writing ability. I just did a 2-hour World Cafe for to help a colleague. Called in, and this was a week ago, and it was 3 rounds of conversation in a World Cafe online, and we had 2 questions, which 3 groups came to us individually and talked about. And so they only had about 30 minutes, 10 people. There's not a lot of facilitation work going on. There is inviting them to talk, listening, and then recording and pulling out, because that was one of our responsibilities, recording and pulling out the core messages and themes that they were talking about. So I think at times in the facilitation world, that ability to synthesize and then to record in the sense of, here are the main things that you have said, I'm putting it into, you know, some kind of a captured data format, what is really missed, and I groups want it. My clients want me to be able to do that.
And I think this is where the high art comes in, because it requires to also to deeply listen, as you said, to listen what is said, to hearing what is not said, to reflecting it back, and then also the ability not to mix it up with our own belief system and in our own lens. So this is where the neutrality comes in,
Yes.
and the inner game of letting them own it and not being attached to our own interpretation. So I think this is it's a very sophisticated skill, this synthesizing, because
Yes.
paraphrasing is basic. Everyone can paraphrase. Everyone who can hear words can paraphrase. Synthesizing is, as you said, pulling out the nuggets, bringing it into a new form so that it appreciates the value and maybe even opens the door for a deeper conversation.
And I like that comment about opening the door for a deeper conversation, because an alternate approach to the synthesis is to invite the group to do that. And as often as I can, that is what I do. And we have had this type of a conversation. Maybe it's some type of a pair, share, discovery conversation. Maybe it's some type of small group back into the large group, and then invite someone in the group to summarize, to synthesize what they hear. And that's my preferred method. Recognizing that at times the client organization very much wants and will say, Barb, would you please do that? Because we just need to hear how somebody else outside of, you know, the 8 of us is hearing this. So Miriam, it's such a fine balance, because we do not, as you said, want to take away the ownership of the group.
Yeah.
The responsibility of the group and our role in it, because I still think a facilitator is part of the group and doesn't stand away, part of the group with a specific role. So that it's a fine balance of who, when, and how, and why do we do that synthesis.
Yeah.
I don't want it forgotten as a core competency. Yes.
Thank you for pointing that out. And a big responsibility.
Oh, yes.
Because through the synthesis, it might put the conversation into one direction or another. And then depending on the maturity of the group as well, are they picking up on what the facilitator said, or do they dare to challenge it?
Yes.
Are they making it their own, or do they feel maybe manipulated? So there's a lot of nuances that also play into that, which has to do with power dynamics between the group and the facilitator, trust.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It is, you say it's a very complicated role. And I think it's very important that we as facilitators go first to the group. And then there is, I have over the years followed wonderful posts about the power of the pen and the concept of the group records on a flip chart instead of the facilitator. And that's a really good illustration of hopefully the synthesis, the power belongs with the group. and then again, very simple, concrete example is that if the facilitator is doing the recording, which many groups want, when you're in a large group and using that kind of a method, you write exactly what they say. Or you're doing it online and you write exactly what you say. So I, as much as possible, recognize that important skill of synthesis, and as much as possible, try to get the group to do it.
Yeah. Although being aware that very often we hear what we want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So we may all listen to the same talk. And when 20 people listen to the same speech and you ask them for the highlight or the synthesis, most probably you will get 20 different opinions or 20 different lenses on what the core message was, depending on what they wanted to hear and what mattered to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how can you control for that if you're inviting the group to record? Because none of those who are in the workshop by definition is unaffected and really neutral. They all have a role, they all might have an agenda. So either everyone has to record, and then it's like a World Cafe style. I think that's at the heart of the World Cafe, right? That everyone records and everyone supervises the recording and adds to it. And then it's complete and unbiased. Otherwise, it's difficult, I think.
I think of methods, and that's what just popped into my mind when you said, so how do we do that? And quite often it is, what is the process? What is the purpose? What are the products, the outcomes, the results that the group wants? And then, what's the design, the flow, the methods to use? And there are fundamental methods that I use, and that I really believe a facilitator benefits from having some fundamental methods. And they allow for that contribution by everyone from their own perspective, and then working it through into what is the core message that this group is conveying, and then deciding. So it's that allowing that that divergent, what Sam Kainer calls the divergent participation, the many, many, many ideas, allowing those kind of discussions to happen through good design, through good methods, and working with the group to let them know they're doing this, and then bringing it back in to the convergence. And I'm using all my hands, which no one's going to see.
Yep, there will be a recording.
Right, and that's the point where, what have we heard? What are the main messages? And it happens in so many different ways, Miriam. It's the card consensus method. It's clustering. It's affinity clustering. I mean, there are many, many ways of doing that. It's just recognizing that those methods need to allow everyone's contribution, everyone to feel safe to contribute and feel that their contribution is valued. And then, what does it mean? I just read this wonderful article about the individual, the right of the individual and the right of the collective. And the example was around one person in, probably a group of 20 having a very strong opinion, and the rest of the group simply not agreeing with it. And so it's that balance then of, with the group, what are we doing about this? And when does the right of the collective, which I'm kind of moving away from our first topic, but when does the right of the collective come through as opposed to the right of the individual? And I think it's one of the beliefs that the value of the benefit of a group, the conversation that a group of people, a group of individuals coming together, what they achieve is so powerful. It's that also that balance, the right of the individual, the right of the collective.
Yeah. And then what is the long-term goal? If, as you mentioned earlier, it's so important that at the end the group owns it, because otherwise a workshop will just remain a workshop. And nothing happens with the insights afterwards. Someone has to carry them forward outside of the workshop space. And this is only done if everyone feels the ownership to it.
So I'm a firm believer in application of anything. And if I'm going to look at a flow, people discover, explore, may dream, may design, may decide. Then I like the application of the action. And that's part of what I know is my preference. So anything that is decided, I'd like having it applied back into what is your reality? What is your work or your volunteer or your personal situation that this topic has been about, and we've come together in some type of a facilitated conversation. Okay, how are you going to apply it? And how are you going to act upon it? And I have seen, wonderful, and being part of and facilitated wonderful workshops where you reach a decision stage and everybody's really excited. And then you move into, whether it's as simple as what are the next steps that we're going to do? What do we do to act on this? Or it's a very, very formal, because the group has asked for it, who, what, when, where. And if the stoppage in conversation happens there is so many things that are going on that you need to explore. So I really like encouraging a group to have some type of conversation, brief to lengthy about, so what are we doing with this now? We've made this decision. How do we act upon it? And they're very willing to, yet it's also can be a moment of anxiety because the abstract goes into practical and reality.
Yeah, in the abstract, there are all the happy hormones. It's
yes.
like taking the decision that from tomorrow I will go to the gym. Tomorrow I'll start my diet. Tomorrow I will do all and then we produce all these happy hormones, and then it's tomorrow and it's like, oh, I have to go to the gym. And I wonder to what extent we too often rush into this action-taking step and forget to acknowledge that groups are in a certain rush, in a certain emotional state by the end of it. Either they're overly excited because they have spent this creative, trusting, connective time together, and then take decisions or come to an agreement that might be slightly overconfident. And then they might overcommit, or they're totally exhausted after a full day or multiple days of working so intensively. And I wonder whether it wouldn't be healthier, now that we are so used, and I'm thinking out loud, I'm making this up, now that we are used to working remotely anyway, to detach the action planning from the decision, to say, okay, we took this decision, let's sleep over it, come back tomorrow, think whether this is still valid, and see how we're going to implement it.
And that was exactly where my mind was going when you were talking. And I'd love to hear it, because the pandemic has given us some opportunities that we can seize and use, and I am, and it's exactly the sort of thing you're saying. So yeah, you go out on retreat with the group. I mean, maybe it's leadership development, maybe it's strategic planning, maybe it's some kind of new organizational structure. I mean, whatever it is, and the group reaches the decisions they reach the action stage. The beauty now is that everybody can disperse. I mean, that might have been online, but it might have been in person, because there are certain things that are better discussed in person, and the group can disperse. And as you say, have some time to think about it. I am so happy that that opportunity has come to us through a very sad global, COVID pandemic. And it's the willingness of the organizations I work with to meet that way, to work that way, to do the combination of, okay, we're going to be in person, and now we are following up online. And, I've got 3 projects that are going through that right now. And it is that second, third, fourth, fifth thought that is so powerful. So I met with a group of 3 government entities. They wanted to form a shared vision. We met in person because it was critical. That kind of a conversation was really necessary in person. So we met in person for a day, went away, and then we've been meeting online with shorter, kind of like hour to 2-hour meetings to continue to draft what did we hear, and now what is this shared vision. And so it's kind of an action stage in one way, but it's certainly a decision stage that is being molded afterwards with a little bit of distance from that event. That, you're right, people feel very, very energized, typically, hopefully, and they also feel fatigue. And that ability to have another discussion around it is so powerful. And I think you've made me realize just how successful that has been. I mean, just going off on a tiny little tangent, I had, and I think I said this to you at some point, when I was back in 2019 and we're going into 2020, and I'm looking at my business and saying, what is it that I would really like to be able to do? One of the things that were very important to me was, how can I develop an online facilitation so that I can with more benefits and value help clients after the in-person, because almost all my work was in person. And lo and behold, 2.5 years later, that's just part. And it's certainly me learning to facilitate online. And at 25 years of business, well, which is fascinating to think about and experience. Yet, even more so, it's the willingness of individuals, and then individuals in a group, to say, oh yeah, we can do this. We're now happy to do that. So there was a little bit of a off our topic about action afterwards.
And I think it perfectly fits into it, because it's the ability to combine the best of both worlds. And by that, I mean that we don't have to rush into everything just because we are on site all together. And that and maybe I can jump on your tangent.
Jump away. I love the way the conversation's just flowing.
Yes. The shift from offline to online. And I came to realize that actually nothing, when it comes to the core facilitation skills, there's not much difference.
Thank you.
If you are a good facilitator on site, you will be a good facilitator online, assuming that you master the tech or have a tech host.
Yes.
So I think online you do have a little bit more of multitasking, or you need a co-pilot. Otherwise, the core skills are the same. So I would be curious to explore 2 topics with you. One is coming back to what you said earlier about core methods that every facilitator must be able to master or must have in their toolkit, and how they relate to the changes of facilitation. What has actually changed in 25 years? Offline, online, is it still the same, or did something big change?
So I'll start with the change and make sure it's going to tie in the core, our foundational beliefs and approaches. Miriam, I'm not so sure that much has changed. Methods to some degree, and primarily the online or the offline, the in-person, the virtual methods, definitely. We wouldn't be having this topic as a conversation, I think, 3 years ago. And I'm recognizing completely that there were many wonderful facilitators already doing extensive online facilitation. The majority, I think, discovered it in 2020. And I really concur with your statements that it's not that much different other than adapting a method to the online and knowing how to work the technology. And I think it took a lot of us, a few months to recognize that. If I think back to March, April, May of 2020, and the quicker I realized that the beliefs, the philosophies, the principles, the approach hold. They go through. If you believe in the wisdom of a group, if you believe that we need everybody's wisdom, and I'm using Institute of Cultural Affairs core beliefs here, based in Canada, we need everybody's wisdom, that the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. If you believe in my strong belief in conversation, get together and talk things through, and maybe you combine that with a little bit of play and a little bit of work at the value of conversation. That doesn't matter if you're meeting in a hotel meeting room or a community hall or on MS Teams or Zoom or any of the other wonderful platforms. So at the beginning, I had to go back, beginning of COVID, I had to go back to what do I believe? And then, okay, how do I do this online? And it came down to tech and methods. You're absolutely right. So the change in terms of the venue, and I'm using venue in terms of the online or the in-person, I mean, that changed. We do some things differently. I thought about this a lot. What has changed incredibly over my 28 years of official facilitation business? And one thing I kind of thought about, and I'm exploring this, probably because you thought it might be interesting that we talk about it at some point if it came up in this conversation. Possibly facilitators are more aware and understanding of the importance of focusing on the group participants. That it is about all of us, the participants and the facilitators, being an integral part of that group with a specific role. And what I'm wondering about is, when I started 28 years ago, was there more of a consciousness about how does the facilitator work with the group rather than how is the group working and what do I do as a facilitator to contribute? And I don't know, Miriam, if that's a change in the whole global facilitation world, the concentration on it's the facilitator, it's us. It's more us than we and me. And I'm not sure. I know that there is a point in my work and my training, and I see it with other facilitators I help, when that change in mindset comes into being. I don't know if that's a change or if it's just something that I've become even more aware of as we go through. Thoughts around that?
And I wonder, so listening to you, I wonder whether it's maybe a self-reinforcing system. 28 years ago, the organizations that would hire facilitators were different, or organizations per se were different. I assume there was more hierarchy, there was less digitization. So by definition, there was less transparency and less collaboration, just by a lack of resources and means for collaboration. So I assume that the role of a facilitator back then was already a different one. And then with organizational structures changing, organizations becoming more maybe collaborative, this might also then impact the confidence of facilitators and their self-understanding of their role.
Possibly.
And then this might reinforce one another, a facilitator then being able to emphasize the group more because the group has more power.
I had a conversation with a group of facilitators the other day, and it ties in. And the conversation was about are the individuals we're working with within organizations, are they now, after 2.5 years of being online, working remotely, being facilitated online sessions, have they reached a point where they believe they have the skills to work as facilitators? And will facilitators be needed? So I think, in my experience, the individuals I work with probably value a facilitator more. Yet I'm going to continue to talk about this because other ones are not feeling that. So how does that tie back in with what's changed in 28 years or 20 years? I agree with what you're saying, that the organizations have changed in that they are becoming much more knowledgeable about facilitation skills and the importance of them. I'm seeing the core skills of facilitation showing up in what are the essential skills for the next, decade or whatever century it should be. So when I think back to the start of my business, I probably did not have the planning discussions to the depth I have now about what are your beliefs about facilitation, Barb, and okay, what approaches or methods do you like to use? Or, we like doing this when we talk together, and we believe we need to create some inclusion and some equity, and I find the client organizations know more. And perhaps that's a change. Perhaps that's something that I'm seeing more than I did, because I'm not explaining as much what facilitation is as talking with them about what they understand facilitation is and what they need. And that's very exciting to me. Not to the point as these colleagues I was talking with, not to the point that I think facilitation is not going to be needed. I'm seeing it needed even more. I think that there are meetings that people, let's say they're in a team and they meet weekly, are going to just say, we're going to facilitate ourselves.
Yes.
And that might be a challenge for those of us that work within an ongoing process, let's say, within a team and an organization. What's our responsibility to say, how are you doing? What's working for you? Miriam, you're facilitating this session, or they're rotating it. Is there anything I can do to help I don't work in that much of an ongoing situation. So I'm wondering if my colleagues are finding that it is those internal facilitators in an organization that are experiencing this pushback of, hey, we're good. We know how to do this. So it's something I'm keeping my eye on.
Fascinating topic. Thank you for bringing that up. Just to close the earlier one about companies becoming more educated on what it is that they need and want and look for, I think that's a beautiful development because it allows and invites for co-creation of a facilitated project. Instead of, so then the facilitator can really fulfill the role of a facilitator instead of sometimes also putting the hat on of a consultant coming in with advice on what methods to use. So I think it really adds to the playfulness and to the co-creativity of our profession. And I believe that the more internal facilitators there are, the more external facilitators will be needed. So I have the same observation than your colleagues, and I would come to an opposite conclusion because of the following. I think that if we're very often, we don't see that we have a problem until we see that we have a problem. So if I've been sitting in bad meetings for my entire life, not even aware that it could be different, then I learn facilitation and I suddenly feel the pain of sitting in a bad meeting because I know how it could be otherwise. So more people will at first have the awareness of the need of facilitation. Then there will be first the need of training of internal facilitators. And then they will also come to the point where they realize their own limitations, that for what are the topics where an external lens, an external synthesizer, someone who can play with the methods and hold the space, who is not involved in the outcomes, who doesn't have a history with the organization, where they become relevant. And I think the more organizations are educated about the value of facilitation, the more they will be willing to invest in external facilitators because they know how much time and resources they will save by hiring an expert in certain situations.
I agree. And I have an example, very recent one that hits on a couple of your points. So I had a large organization come and ask for a day and a half online facilitation, which we just completed about 3 weeks ago. And what was fascinating about it was they recognized how important it was to have an external facilitator. And they said, we don't normally do this. We just feel we don't know how to collect the information and the feedback and the ideas that we need from the participants. We just don't know how to do it. And they said this would be a one-time event. Yeah, isn't it fascinating that they were at least self-aware enough to say we need to bring in an external person. And then the other part then that was very exciting was that the willingness to co-create with them not having much understanding of approaches, kind of like a bigger approach, and then specific methods. And in fact, at the end, one of my the client reps said, wow, I would have just run a day and a half of PowerPoint and just talked to 20 people online and said, okay, so what do you think? And of course, I and my team did a lot more than that. We used small groups, we used Breakout, we used Miro, we used Google Sheets and slides. So 2 things, the increasing awareness of the value of facilitation, and still within some organizations, not the knowledge of what facilitation can bring. Then this person said, that's why we bring in the pros. I didn't realize that this was kind of the stuff that, that could be done. So I think that we need to be very careful. I need to be very careful to not make any sweeping assumptions. I see it all the time that every organization, and it doesn't matter if it's, you know, a corporate, for-profit, not-for-profit, small, community, large, global nonprofit, they're at very, very different stages. Yes, we don't open up a Zoom meeting and explain every feature on the bottom like we did in May of 2020. But we still, without a doubt, I have participants that come on that might have been on Zoom the second time in their life, even 2.5 years later. So it's that awareness that we need to, as always, ask questions, talk, hear our client or potential client organization's story before we start making any assumptions about the state of knowledge, state of readiness of any kind of organization towards facilitation, which goes into my whole big belief that, you know, the work that's done before the actual facilitated event is, I used to say, is equally as important as the actual facilitation. Now I say it's more important.
Yes.
And I say that to clients so that they understand what is required and what is so important and what will be the success because we're doing that pre-work.
Yeah. And 100%, I agree. And what I find almost ironic is that the work of a great facilitator will almost then go unnoticed, because the majority of the work goes in the preparation to understand what is really the purpose, what is really the problem, who needs to be in the room, how do we open, what is the power dynamic, what is the trust level, how willing are they to do the work, to open up, and all these kind of questions. You need to sense it before you can even start designing the session. And then you design the session and it will almost go, or the facilitator will then almost go unnoticed because it flows and the facilitator holds the space, but participants are doing all the work. And then it's all gone. And participants would say, oh, why did we actually need a facilitator for that?
Okay, you hope they have enough knowledge and awareness of, oh, that was helped by a facilitator. So I did the story of, it's not a story as much, but I'm thinking back 20 years where a lot of facilitators said we were trying to work ourselves out of a job. I don't believe that anymore. I do believe that there is great value in longer sessions, like a 1.5 year session, where I may be very active in facilitating. I'm thinking of some, over the years, I've been involved in multiple organizations coming together and forming some kind of a partnership, which could be a new organization. And those are often very lengthy. And if I look at the arc of my involvement, I start with a lot of collaborative discussion, and then that I facilitate fairly obviously, and then we move into a little bit more co-facilitation where they're taking it on. And when all of a sudden I realize that all I'm doing is sitting there and listening or taking notes, my role is done. And they're doing it themselves, which might be something they have decided they wanted me to do, is, hey, through this process, also teach us, train us. So that's the only time then that I'm working myself out of a job. So otherwise, I think there is great benefit in that external facilitator or the internal, depending on the situation, being there in a role which may be very obvious and maybe much more underneath. And I'm thinking of 2 quick situations. I did, I think it was in June, so a few months ago, a short, it was an hour and a half online, large group. And I think my role in the actual session was probably gently managing time, watching for who wanted to ask questions and acknowledging that, you know, this person is going to go next. There's a lot of active facilitation, yet the work for 2 to 3 months before for an hour and a half with the group was extensive because they didn't know anything about the way that we involve people. Something as simple as, I mean, I said to them, connection before content. It's, I don't even know who coined that, but I certainly believe it. And they loved it. And they said, oh my gosh, well, how do we do that? So I gave them a whole bunch of options at the beginning. And, you know, they ended up doing something as simple as a quick little poll and then a very short pair discussion. Yet helping them, firm beliefs, everything's focused on the firm belief. So all my work on that was primarily done before. And I looked like a timekeeper during the session, which was great. And then the one I was just talking about, I was very much facilitating for that day and a half and guiding them through set conversation methods.
And thank you for the examples. And I would say that for the outside, it might look as if you were timekeeping.
Yeah.
And still holding the space. I think it's something that it sounds woo-woo, and it's not. I think we often miss or underestimate the impact of having a presence. And I do believe that it exists online, having the presence to create this container where people dare to speak up, where they trust each other, where they let each other speak, where they listen deeply, and where they respect the shared principles. And if you would not sit there to, air quotes, keep the time, it wouldn't go that way.
Because I'm keeping the time and gently moving people on to the next topic. I am observing, listening, and being ready to respond and invite as things unfold. Yeah. So think of a remark comes up that is very derogatory. It's being ready to acknowledge that happened, and depending on it, you know, ask others what they think about it, or if necessary, ask that that no longer continues, you know, whatever that the situation can be. And that is what we're doing when it often looks like we're not doing something. I mean, think of open space technology.
Yes.
You know, we have a role as a facilitator. As we wander, we set it up, everybody does the topics, they go off into their groups, self-selected. We have a responsibility to wander the room and just watch for those areas where an intervention may be needed because something may not be safe. So changes, Miriam, this just brought me back to what's changed. Knowledge about certain things have changed, and wording. So psychological safety was probably not a term that I heard back in the 1990s. Now, were there similar terms? Yes, and I'm trying to think what we would have talked about. Great awareness of the need for helping the group create a place that we probably said more than space, or an atmosphere or a climate where they felt they could speak up, they could contribute, or designing, which is what I believe. I believe that people need to contribute in so many different ways, that they're comfortable and then they're uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So if a person is not going to talk in a large group, let's design a method that they can contribute in a different way. So I think we had obviously believed that we had the same ideas about creating a space, about psychological safety, certainly about diversity, equity, inclusion. Just the words have come to the forefront, and probably very much in the last 10 years more so. And a lot of it is because of authors writing. Amy Edmondson on the Fearless Organization, her books before that, writing with research behind it that we then can take and apply. We can do the knowledge transfer, as a lot of health organizations talk about, into our facilitation work with terms that are used. And I didn't talk about a container 15 to 20 years ago. And yet there's a concept that is there in people's mind, and some organizations understand it. Others I will talk about, within this room that we're in, within this circle that we're in. And that's yet the values of respect and inclusion, equity, and they're there, they're just expressed in a different way. So a change, I think, is there's a lot more research and knowledge put out in a way that we can understand it and our participants can understand it.
Yeah. And while you were speaking, I was thinking of the mindfulness revolution. So 20 years, even 10 years ago, you wouldn't do a meditation exercise with a group in a corporate space. They would think that you're totally woo-woo and that you're the spiritual kind of kumbaya person. Today is quite normal. And I wonder whether it became now more normal or corporate to introduce these previously stated as woo-woo techniques into the space. So to speak about a container, which is a container in the way we are using it is something intangible, similar to the space. Whereas before you had to refer to an atmosphere, a room, a table, a group, which is highly tangible.
Yeah.
Just to avoid the spirituality. And I wonder whether there might be an impact of that now we can dare to bring in these more intangible ideas and methods, even into the corporate world.
There's more prevalence of it in society. Certainly in the Western society, that North America that I live in, and what I see now being global and talking with other facilitators around the world, there's more of an acceptance of what might be considered more abstract, spiritual, emotional-based language, the space, the container, etc. I think in the beginning, as you said, just presented it in different ways. And I'm going back to before I started my facilitation business, doing a session with local government councillors who are the decision makers, the politicians. So very powerful in our government. And I worked for them. I was in a government entity and I worked for them, and they asked me to do some kind of a session. I think we were introducing our recreation and parks plan to them. And I started with storytelling. And I remember going, oh my gosh, are they going, how do they do this? And that firm belief in people love being able to share, talk about themselves. And I just simply gave them these little workbooks and said, and I had fun little things like, what's what was your childhood favorite recreation activity? You know, what sport did you play? What cultural activity did you do? And I went through there's maybe about 8 questions, and they filled them out, and then they wandered around and they told the stories to each other. Great success. And I remember being very nervous and thinking, oh, the people like communicating that way. And they've always responded to be able to, in a non-threatening way and a fun way, to talk about yourself. And I think that's what we are doing with using the terminologies. Do I say I'm holding the space? Very rarely. No, it would very much depend on the group. And do I say psychological safety in this room or in this space or whatever? I would probably word it a different way, depending on the organization and the people that I'm working with. And again, when I'm hearing their story, when they're approaching me to work with them, or we're starting the facilitation client relationship, I'm listening to what they're saying. You know, I'm not going to say, so how do you want me to hold the space? I'm going to say, tell me about yourselves.
How do you want me to show up?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that to them. Yeah, I'm going to start with, it's either I start with, just tell me your story. What's been going on? And then I have a whole bunch of probing questions about, you know, what's working well, what isn't working well, what brought you to this stage. Or I start with, so, you know, what's your purpose for doing this? What's the reason? What are you hoping may be different? It's interesting because I find, and I'd love to hear what you find, given the choice of the context, the story about what's going on, and let's say the outcomes that we want to achieve, I'd say 75% of the groups I talk with want to tell me the context of the story. And then I lead them. So even when I ask them, you know, where would you like to start? They start there because it's a story. They can talk about the story and then move over to what do we want to achieve. So yeah, in some way, a change, but I think I've realized during this conversation is some of the terminology very much, but not necessarily the core values or beliefs that we are holding around it. It's just the words we're using to present it. And I'm laughing because woo-woo, up to probably 10 years ago, I would have heard people say to me, now we don't want touchy-feely. Okay, please, we don't want the touchy-feely. I don't hear that very much anymore, which is really fascinating. Because then you have, okay, so tell me, what's touchy-feely to you and how do you define it? And I'm just laughing because I realize I don't hear, we don't want touchy-feely anymore. Oh, that's interesting to me.
I still hear it from very specific companies that fall into the category of hierarchical, middle-aged white man dominated. There, I get that.
Yeah, I
the
think
touchy-feely.
I hear more, okay, we want to achieve something. You know, we want to accomplish something. It's a statement more so now. Which, and it's not that all of a sudden everybody's embracing whatever they mean by touchy-feely, which normally ended up into one, physically touching. You know, and again, you can move around that very easily. So that was one thing, was the physically touching each other. You know, and at a certain point, if it's appropriate in a session, all of a sudden you can do a group sculpture and people are thrilled to do it. You know, or just a individual body sculpture and they're laughing because that sense of safety has come into it. But the language has changed around that.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing for me to realize. And I think it's more of a reflection of cultures changing, as you said, mindfulness, meditation. I mean, I might have said 20 years ago, let's, and I did, obviously. So, no, let's take 5 minutes so everybody has a chance to write their ideas down around it. And I wouldn't say, no, let's sit and reflect and think and meditate about our answer. Now I might more deliberately say to a group, we need to take time to just focus on what we're here for. So I'm just going to lead you through a quick little, body relaxation, not with all groups, but then I may say, okay, if you're in the chair, let's put your feet on the chair firmly, and and do some stretching and things like that, and have it received very well, depending on the gentleness that I bring it in. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's been interesting. Again, it's not the belief or the core approach is changing as much as how we talk about it, and how we may acknowledge that people are more comfortable with this. Again, tiny little tangent. I mean, I know that mental illness is still very, very, very hard for people to acknowledge and admit. Yet compared to 30, 35 years ago, massive difference. So individual, society, knowledge has just changed enough that in my culture, there is more openness about our individual strengths and challenges. And I think that's translating over into the sessions that I facilitate, and then allow me to more deliberately say, we're going to do whatever it is, whether it's a centering exercise or a focusing exercise or a short meditation, or I'm sending you out into nature because you all need a break and I want you to do this, or yoga breathing, or inviting someone who's practices yoga to introduce things within it. Much more comfortable doing that.
And I think it's also because the limits between the private and the professional have been smoother or less strict over the past 10 years, and especially since the lockdown, where we basically were invited into each other's living rooms or kitchen tables through Zoom. I think this also helped to change the language, be more gentle with each other, and speak in a different tone. And I wonder whether you mentioned the core methods that facilitators. I'm still coming back.
We haven't gone back to that, have we?
And I'm particularly thinking of design thinking, where I can imagine that there is an era, a facilitation era before and after design thinking.
Oh, yes. And fascinating topic to bring up. I do not consider myself highly knowledgeable, experienced in design thinking, and yet I could possibly be doing it all the time, right? Because I haven't taken, training. I've done a lot of reading around design thinking. So of course I'm going to run away from this conversation, Miriam, and start really looking at design thinking. And I'm either going to go, oh, wow, that's what I'm doing, which was my first formal facilitation training through Institute of Cultural Affairs, wonderful organization. I went 3 hours in, I was, oh my gosh, there's an approach, there's beliefs, there's methods that around what I have been doing. So I'm always thinking that about design thinking. So no, did I hear 25 years ago the term design thinking? No.
Didn't
Or
exist.
human-centered design? No. Others might have, but I certainly didn't. And did it not exist? I wouldn't say that. I think it existed. It's just, again, a body of knowledge, and then application of that knowledge has grown up around it.
And writing about it. Yeah, as you mentioned.
And the writing about it, absolutely. And I would have, and still do, I would have talked a great deal about, the participant or the individual being at the center with the group, with that back and forth between, because the individuals join into the group that we work with. And always, always, always that central focus on those people that are going to come. And I don't think it's changed. What I do think is that as a facilitator starts in, I'm going back to core beliefs or approaches or whatever, what I call the foundational principles and approaches. I find that as people start going into being facilitators, a great deal of the immediate attention and learning is around the method. And I'm going back 25 years ago, there were methods on how to do icebreakers, which is my biggest minor pet peeve in the entire facilitation world, the term icebreakers. That's what we go. And it was all about methods. And even now, I trained a couple of years ago, a group over a couple of days, and they wanted to be better facilitators. And I always spend a lot of time, like, what does that mean to them? And I will use the why of facilitation, which is philosophies, beliefs, values, and then the hows might be the competencies, etc. But I'll use a why and a how and a what. And so it translates into beliefs, philosophies, approaches, and then methods. And if I ask participants, what do you want to most learn, spend the time on over these 2-3 days? It's always methods. So it's a concern of mine, in that I truly believe that the methods come very close to the end. You start with understanding your beliefs around facilitation, the wisdom of the group, the contribution of the individual to a greater whole, the importance of conversation, the collaboration, interaction, engagement. I mean, those are the beliefs. And then we can start moving into the way that we pull them out. So it's the principles. So you go back to the IAF core values. We are in service to our clients. We are using our facilitation competencies to add value to their work. We respect the culture, the rights, the autonomy of the group, and we help them understand it, appreciate it, and respect it within their group. We use processes, methods, tools responsibly. I mean, those are the principles we want to follow. And then I am a real believer in this foundational approaches. And by that, I mean, when you are with a group and things are just happening, that all of a sudden you have great anxiety, great fear, great trepidation, one of those moments. What is it that you have within yourself to fall back on? What is it that you can go into and say, this is what is going to help me through? So I have two, and I was trained in technology participation, again, through ICA, out of Canada, and they use as a method and right through to a framework and right through to a philosophy, the focused conversation of the ORID, O-R-I-D. Objective aspect, reflective, emotional aspect. I is interpretive and D is decisional. And when I am in that moment of a participant is challenging me or challenging each other, there's been a big, kerfuffle of some sort. A person who's drunk walks into the room. You never know what's going to happen. I can go immediately into my mind and go through an oral conversation. What is happening? How do I feel about it? What impact does this have? And what do I need to do about it? And it's based on deep beliefs, and yet it's a method that I can use instantly. My other one is Roger Schwartz, the skilled facilitator. And he's in the United States, and he talks about the mutual, oh my gosh, I just lost the actual terminology, but it's kind of like a mutual learning cycle. And in the cycle, you do a similar type of observation, reflection. So what's going on here? And this is in your head. What's going on here? And like what? So the what, the so what, the now,
and the now what.
Kind of, that kind, which is fundamental too to me.
Yeah.
And you do that in your head, and then halfway around the circle, you go, okay, so the now what, or the decisional stage, do I take it to the group? Do I make it open? And what do I say to them? And so if you decide it, then you go back and you openly say, Miriam, I see, there's 5 people have pushed their chairs back, crossed their arms, and are scowling. I see 2 people jumping up over here, yelling at each other. Like, what are all of you seeing? So it's the same thing. That's what I mean by a fundamental approach, and everybody has different ones, based on beliefs that in the moment you can go to I think facilitators need that. They need to get rid of method. I mean, of course we need the methods. Know why you're doing the method. Oh, there I am. Had my little moment of passionate speech.
And I hell yeah, totally agree. I think why many love methods is it's the false belief of security. Oh, I have my method, I have my certification, and now I have permission to do that work. I have the method, so now I'm safe, although they're not. And from what I hear, I love the example of having the methodological grounding almost. And for me, it's a way of switching from the emotional to the mental state, which I think is important for a facilitator. And that's what I heard in what you said. There are moments where we get triggered, where we feel anxious, out of control, overwhelmed. What's going on?
Oh,
it's not working out.
Swear, if we won't.
Or where our inner child kicks in, where suddenly a participant speaks to us and we project all of our mom issues on them. And this is the moment where we have to find a way to calm down our emotions, to get back into our mind space and back into control, so that we can act consciously and in service to the group, instead of we act based on our own inner story.
And it is so important to recognize the emotional state, which is why I like the ORID with the objective, but just what is happening, seeing, hearing, sensing, touching, the factual stuff. And then the reflective is, what is my emotional response to this? Because we as facilitators need to acknowledge that. And okay, it's because, my son did that as a child and oh my gosh, I just see it all happening here again. Or, I mean, who are you kidding? I've just learned all about Indigenous history, and everything you said is so wrong and makes me very angry. Well, what? Acknowledge that, and then, okay, what does it mean for the group? And I mean, and this happens in, like, you know, it's 5 seconds in your head. It's 10 seconds in your head. So I use the ORID framework for design of 6-month processes, all the way to 10-second quick reflections in my mind as I'm standing there in front of the group. And so I guess that's what I mean by a foundational approach or mindset, call it what you want. There is, oh my gosh, is it Dressler? Wonderful. I'm really, really good at reading things. I don't come up with models, but oh my gosh, I can adapt them, use them, acknowledge them. And there is a wonderful one, and I think the author is Frank, no, it's Larry Dressler. Standing in the Fire is his book. And he comes to the way of being. And I love that, the way of being.
Yeah.
Facilitators, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, who we are. I just wrote it down. While we are working with a group, you know, the emotional, physical, attitudinal, behavioral, even spiritual presence. And that's, you know, it's such a powerful way of being with the group.
Yeah.
And even that is, if you bring yourself back to that, what is the way I want to be with this group, and what do they need, and how are they coming in? I mean, that can be your foundational approach. It's something that you really can use because it's based on your beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think then you also come to the state that you will hear about a new method, like back then design thinking, and realize, oh, I've been doing that. Maybe not in this kind of sequence. Maybe I didn't, maybe not for this type of process or problem. And still the elements were part of your practice before. And that's what I realize now, that I think if I host a workshop, I basically use 5 activities. That's it.
And what are the 5 activities?
I think it's a 1-2 for all. So self-reflection, then small groups. Then I use question brainstorming. I think it's the most underrated activity there is, because questions teach us more than answers, and we don't ask enough questions. There is a pre-mortem. How can we fail? And what can we do to avoid it? And then there is clustering, affinity mapping.
Yeah.
And I think I don't do much more than that.
Yeah. And combine them and adapt them in different ways. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I wasn't sure. I definitely, you know, some sort of great variation of small group work. Okay, individual, so like the 1, 2, 4, all, whatever combination it is. And you know, and so then you can incorporate active listening and storytelling with that, and imagery with that, you know, physicality, the questioning. I think I need to be more deliberate in the use of questioning in design for the group. So thank you. I truly and absolutely believe that getting the correct questions are the most important. And it's probably one of my challenges for myself, the question, yet you having participants do it. Yes, I've just got all sorts of ideas bubbling up here. So thank you, Miriam, for that. Clustering, affinity, absolutely. Yeah, core to go to.
And the questions, it was just today we had at the community, we had a little mastermind session where everyone presented their workshop ideas, and then I invited them not to share their ideas on how to make the workshop ideas better, but only questions that come up related to this workshop.
Yes.
And the beauty of it is that a question just reflects whatever is going through your mind. You can ask, if you don't expect anyone to answer the question, a question is just a play an invitation. You can ask crazy questions or risky questions. And the ownership lies with the person who received them.
Mm-hmm.
And after, I think, 5 minutes of question storming, Thomas was like, okay, now I have enough food for thought to design a year of workshops out of this one idea that I just brought in.
Oh, I love it. And it's, I mean, it reminds me of things like Pro Action Cafe, where a person presents something and others respond, and then that person takes away those ideas. Or, you know, the ritual ascent and descent, which I love, where small groups develop prototypes and then one person presents it to another group and they disagree with it and agree with it. And, you know, that power of that. Or out here in the prairies in Canada, we have a fun one we call barnstorming. So it's the idea of raising a barn together, like the pioneers did. And so somebody presents something and then everybody barnstorms ideas. The questioning, I will have participants say, okay, write down 2 questions you're going to ask. Yet I haven't transferred the importance of questions from me to them enough. So I'm really taking that away. Questioning, brainstorming, powerful. So thank you. It's just going to get incorporated into a few things. Again, more intentionally. Maybe I do it without even realizing it, because I really believe that the question is often more important than the answer. Yet I haven't been intentionally using it. So I will.
Yay. I'm hosting a question dojo on Wednesday, I think.
Okay.
In the community. What's your #1 facilitation challenge?
It's like, what's your one superpower, which I never can answer? Okay. I have a couple, and what would I say? Okay, so I'm going to do a very personal one, and I'm going to do probably what I call more of a process one. And so I'm going to start with the process, and that's the client organization, and I not truly knowing why we're doing this. And that is, so the nuances of that challenge is around, again, it's all that pre-work. Again, it's the asking the questions to help them recognize their situation and their needs and what they want to achieve, because it may not be what they see in the surface. So it is, the challenge for me is, without guiding or directing or suggesting too early how that could happen, is to use all that pre-design, pre-session, pre-work to really, really, really help them and I together understand. So, I mean, a change, Miriam. I used to have probably a 3-page checklist of questions I would go through. And over the years, I've just refined that to, you know, like the 16s, which I never know who actually coined it. I know Michael Wilkinson used it, you know, a lot with strategy leadership, but, you know, the purpose, the products, participants, probable issues, process, place, sometimes just who, what, when, where, why. And so I've taken the 3 pages of questions and just synthesized it down. So that's really important. And I remember during my my first certification with IAF, a conversation with the assessors around, I mean, I was probably at 19, 18 years by that time before I did the certification for many reasons. But I remember we talked about experience needing to be set aside to truly understand and hear the story of the organization, in that they said, you have so much experience that you can probably jump ahead and know where they're going. And you will probably be right 90% of the time. Hold back on that. And I am taking that so to heart. So that's a challenge. That's what I call my process. My personal, when a participant continues to constantly challenge a process, right within the moment. And it's the nuance again, that individual right over the collective right, that you can see everybody's eyes are kind of going, oh, please, facilitator, do something tactfully and kind, but like, just make this go away, you know? And it's that constant. That can still be really personally challenging to me, because I think a lot of it is, it's back to, you know, growing up in, like you said, the middle-aged male having a lot of power in our lives. And that's the organizations I started in. And though I was able to, you know, either collaborate or push back or work respectfully, challenge them, it's still there and ingrained. So that's a personal challenge I really work on a lot, to go, it's not about me, take it to the group. And that's just one of my mantras, take it to the group. What
And how would you do that?
Okay, so sometimes it is simply saying, Miriam, I hear you saying you want to change this decision-making process from a small group prototype development for a mission statement to the whole group staying together. Okay, please, I invite you to explain your reasons. They explain the reasons, and I say, great. Anyone else want to share the reasons? They share the reasons. And I can say, with your permission, I will explain a reason for doing it as a small group. Fine. Now let's make a decision, and we abide by the decision of the group. So it's always recognizing it and taking it back to the group. This is what I hear your concern is. What is the clarification? What do you as a group think about it? Now, I mean, a kind of a funny story is that just before COVID, I did an in-person day-long session with an organization, and we were going to use a continuum of agreement, where on a couple of key decision statements they had made. And the continuum of agreement was from 1 to 5 of the, we didn't use the word importance, but I can't think of the word, but the importance of doing this for the organization over the next 5 years. And you indicate 1 to 5 on each one of them. And one participant absolutely said, no, we have to put weights in. I mean, I do this activity and I do it in 15 minutes, multiple times. It's always successful. They see where each other is, is focusing. It's not dots. It's a very much on a continuum. And you might have 5 things that are equally important to do, or you might have 2 that come up. But this person wanted to put weights, numeric weights on every one of them. And so I did ask him to explain why. And I asked the group to decide how to explain. And we talked for 30 minutes about how we were going to do the exercise as opposed to just doing the exercise. And I've always thought, it was a real challenge, because I thought he was very, very vocal. And very much, even, if somebody said, okay, well, we could just try it and see how it works. He was so forceful. I was really doing what's the collective right over the individual right. And, I don't know if I handled that well. We went with the group deciding they were going with his method, and we did it. And the results in my mind were probably identical to without weights. So that's how it's still a little interesting. And it's, how do you take it to the group? You acknowledge it, get it clarified, get the reasons explained, and then let the group decide.
Yeah.
Stepping out of, oh my gosh, it's about me. It's about me. Oh my gosh, I'm the facilitator and I have to solve this. No, it's about them. It's about us. Yeah.
Good one. And thank you for sharing this. I think it's something that many of us struggle with. The air quotes, difficult personalities.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I always like to talk about, just the person with whatever the behavior is. I don't like using difficult groups or difficult participants, because I think there's a reason. The person who's interrupting all the time, the person who is belligerent, what's the reason behind it? And, if it's a training session, Miriam, we can say, people are here to be trained. I hear you saying this. I see you doing this. I acknowledge that you have said this. The whole group is here to be trained, and that's what you signed up for. So we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
We will move on. That's very different than a facilitated process where they're all together as one group and they all have the responsibility and the interest in reaching whatever that decision is, whatever that result is going to be.
Yeah.
You have to acknowledge, but then say, really saying to them, there is a collective right here. Everybody, how do we deal with this? Because you can't just say, everybody's here to be trained. This is what you signed up for. We're going to carry on. Everybody's here to have their perspective considered, to feel that they've contributed, that they've been heard, and that they're hearing others. Where are we going with this one? Collective. And so I really take it to the group. Depending on how big the group is, I might do everybody talk in circle. I might do, if it's really big, it might be a quick trio and you're coming back with one quick statement. And it might just go to, a show of hands. I remember 15 years ago, a co-facilitator and I were with 40 people. Well, you just don't have time to do big circle unless it's that critical. And we had explanations of the 3 different methods they wanted to use, and we did a show of hands. And Or go to the group, invite the group to decide. Yeah.
And there again, a very important distinction about the hat we're wearing when we come to the group. The facilitative trainer as opposed to the process facilitator or the facilitative consultant, where if you're in the shoes of a consultant, you still can act differently on such behavior and call it out maybe.
Yes. And I think when I learned the terms of, process facilitator, which I always consider myself to be group facilitator, but then learned the, facilitative trainer, facilitative leader, facilitative consultant, facilitative coach, it just made things so much easier when you're in those roles. I mean, I very rarely am. I do some training and I do it in a very facilitative way. I do some, the consulting would be more like a project I'm just taking on with a series of focus groups for a corporation where they want to dig into the results of an employee survey. And I'm not consulting, I'm facilitating a series of focus groups. And I'm taking what they hear, what they say, and present it back. But it's still, it's that skill, it's a writing skill is what it comes down to. What we talked about earlier, the synthesis and the writing, the theming. It's not consulting in that, they're saying this, so I think you should do this. It is, they said this, they said this, they said this, as opposed to recommending what they do with it. So that's the closest I get to facilitative consulting now, and I'm not really sure that I would even call that consulting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the inch that would make the difference is to then take a stance and really say, okay, based on my observations and what I've seen and what the focus group said, I believe that you should
Yes.
do this.
Yeah. From a business perspective, I will use to distinguish between being a consultant and a facilitator. I will use an assessment of, could I be sued over this? And a recommendation of how a group should proceed or what they should do is something that I could be sued over in the sense of the content, the decision.
Yeah.
You should reorganize and eliminate these 5 positions and add these 2. You should, because it's almost the should, a very advantageous process would be for you to amalgamate with another entity. Didn't work out. That's professional advice I could be sued over. As a facilitator, I am offering them, a discussion and a decision-making approach, which they then apply as they wish. And so I would probably not be sued over, you had us, use the consensus card workshop method to do this. They might say, well, you were really inept.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
So that's one I, because obviously there's a whole business side to all of this too, after 28 years.
Good one.
Will you be sued? Okay, think about that.
Scary thought. And usually one that doesn't necessarily cross the mind of a facilitator. And that's then exactly the difference.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what makes a workshop fail?
Not the pre-work that has to be done. And that's like a big, that's a big topic. It's I and my client organization not articulating, saying, and then understanding and having a mutual agreement about, the purpose of this and the product, if there are products. Well, I always believe there's a purpose. I actually do believe there is some kind of a outcome, which might be just, we're going to hear what people have to say. Well, that's an outcome. So it's that, first and foremost, everything fails because we did not understand what the situation was and the reasons we are going into this. So a gazillion years ago, probably in about my 5th or 6th year, I did a wonderful facilitation of 4 organizations coming together to create a new one. And it was over a year and a half. And they interviewed a number of facilitators, and they told me afterwards that they said that we knew you were the right person when I asked them in the interview, what could go wrong in this whole process. And so I've always remembered that. I thought, so that's part of what could go wrong. And to me, it's not understanding. So that's a biggie, not articulating what are those concrete and experiential outcomes, results. So, and then it's that incomplete and inaccurate planning. So it's all that pre-work. The facilitator taking on the role without being the best match. There's times you push out of your comfort level. But I was just asked to do a day of fun activities. We want a facilitator that's just going to come in and we're going to have fun. And so, so I really explored whether it's a team building, because I do team building using fun activities. If the purpose is around, let's say, team building, or, I'll do, let's explore this topic. All we want to do is get all the ideas up. The purpose is to explore it, and we want to do it in a fun way. So I'll do that. But this purpose was we haven't been together for 2.5 years. We just want to have fun. And I said, that's not like, it's not me. I don't do that. There's people who are very good at that. And sent them off to there. So there is, you can push out of your skill and comfort level, because you can always learn new techniques. I mean, think of all of us online. Like it's, you know, whether or not you have the attitude, the competencies for it. It's good to feel nervous and scared and yet excited. So there's that match. That's a professional responsibility and an ethical responsibility we need to take on. And a workshop will fail if that doesn't work. And you know, and just again, our mindset. You know, as a facilitator, it's for me to we. You know, it's anytime I go into a session, I do what I call kind of channeling the participants. You know, I think it's probably from a seance, not that I've ever done a seance, but they're coming to the workshop, you know, where are they coming from and how are they feeling and what are they thinking? So I get away from me. Probably I design. I don't want people to think, here, listen to this, and I don't believe in methods, because oh my gosh, do I believe in methods? And I design intensively, and that's my comfort, to be able to just throw it all away in the room when you need to. Hey, you know, this design, in my mind, isn't going to fit as well as let's go into, you know, the circle way, and I'll teach you how to do that, and it's going to be more effective. Or, you know, or we need to do an abbreviated appreciative inquiry rather than infinity clustering. So inflexibility, like plan, yet be flexible. And the reverse is so flexible, you have nothing. Yeah, unless that's the intent. You just back to hold that space, ensure everybody's talking and contributing. Yeah, so those are what I would say, some of them. That's what makes workshops fail.
Thank you. Yeah, can relate to those.
One more, the old only using one approach or one technique. I mean, it's different than having core approaches and, you know, 5 methods that we use in interperson, you know, into exchange. Yet it's all I ever do is God consensus or infinity clustering or whatever, and I use it in every single way. You know, that's then not that.
It's a hammer, having the hammer and seeing nails everywhere.
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, how does it go? Everything is a nail because you have a hammer. Yeah. That one just came to mind too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the way it just wandered.
Yes. Yeah. I have a final question, if I may. Yeah. Did you ever get bored being a facilitator?
Oh no. Oh, I'm doing my facilitation life is passing before my eyes right now when you ask that. And I'm thinking, would I have ever used the word bored? No. And every single one is, even if you can use, you know, a same design over and over again. I very rarely do. I don't have like set templates. Every one is so different and is so exciting to see what is it going to be. So the phone rings, or well, now it's an email, or it's coming through LinkedIn or my website. I mean, that's a big change, by the way, I forgot to say. I'd say 60% of my work comes through some kind of online request, approach, whatever now. And that was not the case 28 years ago. Yeah. So that's been a big change. The same excitement and thrill and anticipation is there, as well as, depending on the situation, the nervousness and the anxiety around it. I look deliberately for challenging things, because I mean, I just like being able to push a little bit now myself. Can I make a difference? No, absolutely. I guess maybe if I got bored, that's when I would say, I have done what I came here to do, what I was put on the earth to do, my purpose. No, never bored. Isn't that a fun thing to be able to say?
Beautiful. And at the same time, it's like, if you really live the facilitator's mindset, almost you cannot be bored, because it's in your hands. You have agency to design it in a way that it's not boring.
I love that. What a great way to put it. I mean, it's just intrinsic in our work.
Yeah.
It's learning. I mean, there's times, and not the last 3 years, but I'm going to go back about 6 years where I went, am I missing new? Am I missing changes in the way people facilitate and what people want from facilitators? And I questioned that. And the answer is the constant learning. I mean, that continual development of what is out there. And, you know, a lot of the old has become new again. You know, because I chuckle when I'll read LinkedIn posts or something about a particular, activity or way to work with a group. And I go, oh my gosh, we were doing that 28 years ago. And I have to go, and yet, look, isn't it wonderful that that's still so useful and beneficial and recognized as a value? And oh, look at the spin that this person in Asia has put onto it because they just learned about it. So it's that kind of embrace that people are looking at the old, even though they might think it's new, and then learning. Where can I go? I mean, COVID just helped. Where do I go? The connections I've made, that the communities I'm joining, with both anticipation and anxiety. It's I've never done before, really. It's that constant learning and challenging a little bit as I proceed. I mean, obviously, I'm almost thinking of it's almost a new season. We talked about seasons for my business since the pandemic started, because so much changed in our participants' willingness to go online and the ability to learn. So it's a very exciting time for me, a time of great growth.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Almost 2 hours.
Yes, where did we? And isn't it amazing how one statement just leads to another, which is what you said. This is a conversation, and I love that we've been able to do that. It's not a set. What did you do and when did you do it? And learned so much by doing this with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anything that you would have wanted to share but we didn't touch upon?
Last night, I had this really interesting analogy that came into my head, and I wrote it down. It was quite late, and it was about a facilitator. Again, as we learn to be facilitators and practice it, and the analogy is learning to drive. And I think one of the neighbor kids came down and just got her learner's license. So I think that's why it popped into my mind. And, and I'm thinking about learning to drive. We learn the mechanics of a car to some degree. We learn the method of driving. How do you start it? How do you stop it? How do you shift gears? How do you use the mirrors? And to me, that's all methods. I mean,
Mhm.
we are aware we're in a car. We are aware we're in a parking lot learning to drive and maybe getting out onto the street and then onto the road and then onto the highway. So that's how a group. There's a time when you're learning to drive that I remember this so clearly, where all of a sudden we are aware that we are part of something much bigger, and it's around safety of each other. It's around being part of a very large transportation system.
Ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. I like that. I was saying, what is the word? It's being aware of everybody else within it and our responsibility to them. And that the learning to drive is just, a way to accomplish something someplace else. And I went, okay, and that's, as a facilitator, learn some methods and learn, have some ideas about group behavior and dynamics. And then they reach a point where all of a sudden they are incorporating those beliefs and principles. They're just built into every method that you do. And so all of a sudden you've gone away from the mechanics of the actual driving skill to that bigger awareness of the ecosystem that we're part of. And I thought, I kind of like that analogy. I think I'm going to use it more often, because I remember a very dear facilitator friend who started her business about 7 years ago saying to me, I'm no longer thinking of all the next steps I have to do in this design I have, or the method that I have to do it in. It just comes naturally to me. And I went, moved over into that whole realm of the way of being as a facilitator. So there's my last night thought as I was thinking about our conversation this morning.
I like that. And how we have to have awareness. In the beginning, when we learn to drive, it's just our own driving. Let's stick to the rules and keep safe. Surviving is the most important. And then suddenly we're also aware of the others and how they impact our driving, and we become aware of everything else that's happening. And then we can change the car. And
well, we can, because it leads to a beautiful analogy also, which I'll use with clients. Do you want a new car? Or what's the purpose of a car? It's a how to get somewhere. What do you need? You need transportation.
And is it a bus or is it a racing car? Do you want to go there fast, or do you want to take everyone along?
Yeah. So I could expand this thing forever. And I know people have wondered. I mean, you can use so many different type of analogies, but that's one that I thought was kind of fun with some benefit.
So I'm looking forward to a car workshop in the
On my next step online, I'll have to put the pictures up. And what kind of car are you feeling like today? Lots of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barb. This has been thought-provoking, inspiring, and just pure joy.
And I thank you for the opportunity. I mean, connecting with you as one of the benefits of our world shutdown and world opening up, that I really appreciate. And just the incredible joy and value of just talking with another facilitator about some of these things that we hold and sometimes don't even recognize we hold them, because I've had a few realizations as we talk. So thank you for the invitation to join you in conversation.
Thank you. That's the end of the podcast jingle.